with our wonderful guests. Since today's webinar is about A/B testing, we couldn't decide which guests to invite, so we'll be testing both. Yeah. So, guys, please welcome our wonderful guests, Phil Carter, growth advisor, CEO and founder of Elemental Growth, and Joe Wilkinson, product manager monetization at chess.com. And I will let guys to introduce themselves.
Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. I've been at Chess for about 2.5 years. I'm one of the product managers on the monetization team. So I handle a lot of our A/B testing, new monetization features, things like that. Before Chess, I was at Meta for about 3.5 years. So went from a humongous company to a smaller company, but still a lot of monthly active users.
And my name's Phil Carter. I've done a couple of these webinars now with Funnel Fox, so it's good to be back. Andre, thanks for having me. I spent 7 years leading product and growth teams at Ibotta, Quizlet, and Faire before deciding to start my own growth advising and consulting business called Elemental Growth. So I've been doing that for a little bit over 2 years. Chess.com is actually one of our recent clients, and I'm a daily active user of chess.com. So excited to be doing this with you, Joe.
Yeah. So Joe, as far as I understood, you have like huge user base, so you should be run like a lot of A/B tests, and Phil has like extensive like experience with A/B testing with different products, different teams, and different like stages of the companies, which like could be good combination of the people here. Yeah, guys, please who join us today, please involve in the discussion and drop your questions, comments, and anything in the chat, and we'll cover them during discussion. And let's get started. And I think the main question today that we need to discuss is it like okay to picking up during the experiment or not? What you guys do? What you guys think? That is it okay to check like interim results during A/B testing or not?
Do you want to take that, Joe?
That's interesting. Yeah. So just to make sure we're on the same page. So checking results as an experiment's going on. Yeah. That can be tricky. And I think from a monetization standpoint, we're looking at just money. Money's really important. So it's hard for us to look at these experiments going and be like, oh, today it's looking up, tomorrow it's looking down. With a lot of our experiments, and something that I've tried to do is like, you want to create a strong experiment from the start, and part of that is defining roughly how long do we want to run it, because then it gives us at least some type of a milestone that like, okay, regardless of what the results say in the next week, we are waiting for at least 4 weeks. And unless there's like a huge drop off, which we haven't really seen with our monetization experiments, but it's still something that it's a muscle that we're trying to flex, in that like at least give it 4 weeks, 6 weeks before you make any big decisions. I think if one of our data scientists was on, he would say, don't even look at the results until it's time. But that's really hard to do. And honestly, like, I think early results can still show you some interesting information about like user activity. But I'd say it's fine to look at it, but I usually wait, until we hit some type of stat sig before we're making any types of decisions.
Yeah, I would say most of the same things Joe said, and having lived this internally for years and years, it's, the data science team always speaks to the theoretical best practice, which is determine the minimum detectable effect, use a calculator to figure out how long you need to run the experiment in order to get statistical significance, and then put it in the black box and don't take it out until you reach that timeline. But in practice, especially if you're a small, scrappy startup, the reality is, the executives want to know the answer sooner rather than later. And there's a little bit of like practicality involved, right? If you've been running an experiment for a week or two, and technically you're supposed to wait 4 weeks, but you're seeing very strong results, then is it okay to call the experiment early? Different teams have different perspectives on that. I mean, the theoretical answer is no, you should run it for the full 4 weeks, but I feel like there are a lot of rules that get broken at startups. So you got to apply some judgment.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I remember my experience with active A/B testing, and it was like kind of like gambling with checking dashboard all the time. Yeah, sure. Yeah, especially at the very beginning of the test. All right. I have a question for Joe. Joe, like Chess.com has how many? Like 200 million users, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, over 200 million registered users. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, it's huge. So I just wondering how many A/B tests you run like per week, per month?
Yeah. How about I do a little higher per quarter? So we have, so I'm on the monetization team, but we have a lot of other teams like trust and safety, our play team, learn, like there's all these other subgroups. Collectively, and I will say, if you look at a chart, because I looked at this before I joined, there's a huge spike in the amount of experiments that we've been running since probably like 2023. Currently, as of this year, every quarter we're running about 55 experiments, and that's across broadly the whole company. That's much lower than we want to be. Our chief growth officer Albert, he has a goal for us next year to be hitting 1,000 experiments in the year, which is a lot. But we also have a pretty big team, and we have a lot of users, so we want to try and get as much data as possible. But yeah, we're running about 55 a given quarter. Monetization specifically, right now we have 10 active experiments, and that's across our kind of what we call our premium funnel. So anything that you like visually see, like pop-ups, our membership page, but also our LCM side. So we're testing different emails, both like upsells, but also just reminders, as well as experiments on our actual like some of our mobile pricing experiments, things like that.
Yeah. Great. What's your main like approach to maintain like many experiments and don't get confused with this noise and data and results?
Yeah, not to sound like a script, but it's kind of what I said at the beginning. It's like you need to start with a relatively strong definition of what you're trying to experiment on and what you're hoping to learn. We have a template that we use in monetization that explicitly states, what a clear hypothesis should be. And so it's almost like we think that A will lead to B because of Y. And so it's how can we get to these outcomes based on what we're trying to experiment and why do we think it'll work? And what that does is it also helps us control the scope of an experiment, because the moment that you get your designer and your devs and even some of the leadership team informed of an experiment, things start getting added like, oh, we should actually try this, we should try this. It's like we need to take a step back, focus on the main thing that we're doing, which hopefully with a lot of things that we're doing in monetization, they're relatively minor changes. Like we do have some larger ones, but we're talking just change the CTA copy instead of like adding just a sticky bar like when you scroll a membership page. Like those are two things that we've seen huge results on. We can talk about those later, but it's trying to not test everything at once. Try small things, make sure you feel confident about those results, and try and control the amount of people adding their ideas to experiments.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, probably it's like it'd be challenging to run all these experiments on this user base. All right, Phil, you run a lot of experiments across like different companies, different stage of these companies. What patterns did you notice, like in scaling number of experiments and in general, like culture of experimentation as the company grows?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with, I think there are a lot of companies that are just getting started with A/B testing, and it can be this big, scary thing, right? It's like, do we build our own internal A/B testing infrastructure, or do we purchase an A/B testing solution from outside? And if we purchase from outside, which service should we use? And how do we make sure we don't make statistical mistakes that could lead us to make the wrong decision? And all of those are important questions. But I think the important thing is, as with so many things in life, right? Just get started. You've got to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. And so that's my number one piece of advice if you're not already running A/B tests at all, is just, there are half a dozen or so good A/B testing solutions out there. You can do the research very quickly. You can get on a call with account managers and make a decision relatively quickly and run your first A/B test. And that's a good start. The other thing I would say for companies that are more mid-stage or late stage and are really starting to ramp up the scale of their A/B testing velocity, similar to what chess.com is doing now, right? Like Albert, Joe mentioned Albert, who joined chess.com as their chief growth officer, I think about a year ago. He came over from Duolingo, which basically could give the master class on A/B testing velocity because they A/B test everything. And it's really hard to be running thousands of A/B tests a year concurrently, right? That takes a lot of sophistication in terms of your infrastructure, in terms of your A/B testing culture, your processes. But it provides a really compounding competitive advantage because the faster you can get to a conclusion on what the best treatment is for any given test, the sooner you start to gather impact from that, and that impact compounds over time. It's not like a paid marketing test where, okay, you're running an ad campaign and you improve the efficiency of that campaign, you run it for another few weeks and then it's over. Like with a product-led growth test, those impacts are going to compound for a very long time. And so I think that's one thing companies don't appreciate enough, is that this really is key to lasting competitive advantage. Dmitry Gursky, who's the CEO of Flow, has a great LinkedIn post where he talks about this. It's like one of the most overlooked competitive advantages that any tech company can have.
Yeah. This is like the exact pattern that we see in Fox among our customers, guys who run a lot of experiments. They're growing faster and scaling faster their revenue.
Yeah. Well, one other analogy I'll use is I spent a few years earlier in my career in venture capital, and it's similar in that it's portfolio, right? A lot of people think your hit rate should be really high. The reality is most growth teams have about a 50% hit rate. If your hit rate on your A/B tests is too much higher than 50%, it probably means you're not making big enough bets and taking enough risk. And so what that means is if you only have a 50% hit rate, you need to be running a lot of experiments. But as long as you're running a lot of experiments, you don't know which ones are going to succeed and which are going to fail. But if you're running enough of them, then you're going to get impact.
Yeah, it's good. Speaking of like A/B testing, there is like different approaches, different like methods to run A/B tests and design A/B tests. This is like I know the guys who I would say that majority of companies run classical A/B testing, like splitting it 50-50. But there are some like exotic ways to experiment with AA testing, AABB, and no harm testing, etc. What's your guys? What's your experience with this?
I can give the basic answer. Then Joe, if there are any more exotic A/B test types you've run, I'd be curious to hear. I mean, at a high level, when I was at Quizlet, my VP of product asked me to just outline like what are the different types of experiments we should be thinking about and when should we be using these different types of experiments. And so the three that I find are the most common are your sort of classic A/B test, right? Where you've got a control and you've got a variant, and the variant is testing some deviation. It could be in the user experience. It could be in a machine learning model underlying the product experience that impacts things like content recommendations. But it's a single control and a single variant, or there's an ABC or an ABCD, or what's commonly called just an ABN test where you just have multiple variants. So that's the most common. And in those cases, you're looking for ideally a single success metric with a measurable amount of lift that you expect to achieve going into the experiment. And then you run it for X number of days or weeks in order to see whether or not you're able to achieve that lift. Then there's an AA test where you're intentionally replicating the same experience across both the control and the variant. In this case, the variant effectively is the same as the control. The reason you do this is just to make sure that there's no bias in how you're randomizing your sample and that your underlying A/B testing infrastructure is sound, right? That there are no bugs or issues in your instrumentation. So this is more for just testing the integrity of your infrastructure. And I will say I haven't run a ton of AA tests, but when you're implementing a new measurement solution, it can be really important just to calibrate it, make sure you have it right. And then the third one is a do no harm test. And all that really means is, unlike a classic A/B test where you have a success metric and you're expecting a certain amount of lift, and if you don't achieve that lift, then you're agreeing up front that it's not worth rolling the variant out if you don't get a certain amount of lift. With a do no harm test, the team has sort of collectively decided that they believe this experience is better for one reason or another. Maybe it unlocks additional follow-on test opportunities, or strategically it's more aligned with where the company wants to go long term. But we just want to make sure that it's not going to tank our metrics. And so in that case, you don't even have to see a lift. You just need to make sure that the health metrics or the guardrail metrics you set don't see a significant negative impact. And as long as that doesn't happen, then you move forward.
Yeah, it's also could be related some changes from legal team, for example, or regulations with especially for monetization, for example. And of course, you need to like implement that in your product, but make sure that it's like it doesn't drop conversion rates on like revenue in general.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talking about A-to-A testing, we've done it a few times. Most recently, we did it on purpose. Before that, it was by accident. We actually had found that, I forget what the test was, but essentially, I believe it was for mobile users, and there was something was happening where people with slow internet connections were being artificially bucketed into our control group much higher than in our test group, because the test, for some reason, it delayed where our bucketing was happening. And so we were very confused by that for a bit, and then we're like, oh, this is definitely a problem. So we had to do a test because of that, and we found I forget what the actual back-end issue was, but it was quite an interesting learning experience. And so for the next like 6 or 7 tests, we were always kind of panicked about, okay, are we sure everyone's getting bucketed completely random? But that A-to-A helped us there, which was always quite interesting.
Yeah, but what about your like approach in chat.com? Do you run like A/B tests, classical A/B tests, just or any other like approach?
Yeah, we primarily are doing A/B testing, like just very classical approach. Oftentimes with, I would say more on our product side, they're doing like ABCD testing. I like doing those too because I'm a little greedy and I have a lot of ideas that I want to try and just see, even though, typically as you add more variance, it's going to extend the duration of your experiment. So you kind of need to weigh, okay, how much time do we have? Like, is that going to be too long of an experiment for us to run? But we usually are doing A/B, or we usually cap out at ABCD testing. I would say I don't think we've, at least that I'm aware of, have done these do no harm tests. That said, there was a FTC regulation that was supposed to go into effect I think it was last month or a month or two ago, around making the cancellation much easier for people. And so we had to stand up and experiment for that. And that was essentially a do no harm. Like, we wanted to make sure that we weren't hurting our revenue or our cancellation rate too much. Like, we knew we would take a hit. But I would say how we set up our dashboard was still exactly the same, because we have a template and we're like, whether it's green or red, like we still need to capture this data. But I don't think we've done any super exotic A/B testing, at least that I'm aware of. Maybe our trust and safety team have, but not so much on monetization.
Yeah. Many times I get a question about like multi-armed bandits, where you split the traffic not evenly, like between the variations, but like it's dynamic based on like winning variations, and so winning variations get more traffic. Do you guys have any experience with that? Because like I didn't try it, to be honest. I didn't try it, and but it always looked for me like more complicated, and doesn't force like to test and to waste time and budget for this kind of experiments. But probably you tried it.
I'm curious to hear, Joe, if you all did this at Meta, because Meta to me feels like a company that's so large and so sophisticated that maybe it was quite common. Most of the companies I've worked at are sort of mid-stage. So I joined Ibotta as around employee number 100. Same thing at Quizlet. Faire was probably more like 1,000 employees when I joined. But even at 1,000 employees, right? Like, you can get pretty far with standard Bayesian A/B testing. And so multi-arm bandit is just more complex. Now, the advantage is, and this probably goes a little bit above my head technically, I'm not a multi-arm bandit expert. My understanding is, unlike a classical A/B test where you have a control and a variant and you have an equal number of people assigned to each treatment and you run it for a certain period of time, with multi-arm bandit, the number of people being allocated to each variant, and usually with multi-arm bandit, you have more than just one, is dynamically changing based off of the results you're seeing. So let's say you run a control and 3 different variants. experiments, A, B, C. And 1 week into the experiment, you're seeing that like A is performing really badly, B is performing in the middle, C is performing the best. It will start to allocate more traffic to B and C because it knows that A is performing much worse than the other two. And so to me, the advantage is you're learning faster and you're potentially locking in more positive impact sooner than a classic A/B test. The downside is it's more complex. There's a little bit of a risk of error, right? Because it's possible that the algorithm could shift traffic too early. So I generally don't recommend doing multi-arm bandit unless you really know what you're doing and you already have sophisticated infrastructure and you're really good at standard A/B testing. The one other thing I'll say, and I know we're going to talk about AI and how AI is impacting A/B testing tools later, is there are some new tools that are starting to offer AI-powered A/B testing solutions out of the box, including multi-arm bandit approaches. There's one called Helium that is doing this for paywall optimization. And so the advantage of buying, not building, is you can work with a team that is already, could be PhDs in this field, and that way you can trust that it's going to work, and you don't have to do all the hard work to set up complicated infrastructure support, something like that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can talk about multi-arm bandit testing. So when I was at Meta, yeah, we did use this. I was specifically on the trust and safety team, so we dealt a lot with detecting fake and abusive accounts, understanding like what type of content is harmful, what content is spam or abuse. So we use we use this testing because we have billions of people. We were able to see kind of which of our detection algorithms were correctly identifying the right type of material. We still need to run a full test, but we wanted as much harm to be prevented as possible. So we would start dynamically shifting towards that more where we get like true positives or true negatives on these tests. And so that was one use. Again, that's Meta. That's a humongous company. We had, billions of active users or billions of users. So, but I haven't used this type of testing at Chess. I don't think we have the sophistication or potentially the raw user count for it to make a lot of sense, at least not yet anyways.
Yeah, cool. Interesting. Yeah. All right. Speaking of like experiment design, let's talk about that a little bit. What's your approach for picking up like primary metric and secondary metrics for A/B tests? And in general, how do you design the A/B test? Like, what's the goal? What's the, like how we measure this success or what failure of the test, etc.
I feel like we have it on monetization really easy for the most part. Like we use a dashboard tool called Amplitude, and we have a template that we continually reuse for every experiment. And we have these 4 charts. And these 4 charts, 3 of them are essentially chart A plus chart B equals chart C. And that chart C is our subscription paid rate. That is the percentage of people who are converting to an active subscription based on whatever the experiment is. That's, I mean, since I've started, that's been like the primary metric that we really care about, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we care about. And so it's, for us, or at least for me, it's set up really easy. That being said, those previous metrics are still really important because that tells us a lot about like user behavior. So people starting trials, people who start trials and then go on to convert to an active subscription, and those people who are not trial eligible, we just call them direct purchases. And so those are like our core metrics, with that subscription paid rate being the overall one that we care about the most. That being said, at the true end of the day, it's revenue. And so we've had a few experiments where we're testing different pricing models. We're testing like our friends and family plan. We launched that earlier this year. We did a lot of sensitive testing on trying to understand like how do changes in the number of seats people have, like you can invite 4 people or 6 people or at this price or this price. We were tracking our subscription paid rate, but really overall it was, what's the actual revenue impact based on all these other traits that we're setting for our friends and family plan. And so that's where, for us, revenue is the true North Star metric, but that's usually trickier to measure on a per experiment basis. So we kind of go down to our subscription paid rate.
Yeah. Do you have any house metrics that you like check during the experiment and avoid to like going too much down on this metric?
Yeah. So aside from those metrics that I just mentioned, we are tracking like our overall engagement and our overall retention. And retention, we look at it in a few different ways. The one that we primarily use within our experiments is, do they just come back to chess.com? So we will usually look at that 1, 3, 7 days, 14, and 30 days out from entering the experiment. What percentage of those users, both in control and test, come back to chess.com and perform any event? And so that's a good way for us to understand, like, did we introduce a change in our like onboarding flow that really perturbed people and they no longer want to come back? But then also engagement. So I think it's weekly games played, or maybe it's daily games played. We just want to make sure that we're still tracking usage of our main drive, which is playing chess, but also our individual features like lessons, game review, puzzles, things like that. There are, when we look at more like feature specific experiments, so changing the amount of like puzzles someone has access to, there are more like puzzle specific metrics that we look at that we pull from our like actual puzzle product team. But for monetization, we just have these kind of like high level engagement and like weekly time spent playing chess metrics.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Joe has already highlighted here. Obviously, Joe specifically working on the monetization team at chess.com. And so he mentioned specific revenue metrics or subscriber conversion or retention metrics they're focused on. For user growth, it might be a different set of metrics. But I think the overarching point is, when you're setting up an A/B test, you should have a very clear hypothesis for why you're running the test in the first place. That's more qualitative. Like, why do we think this variant or this set of variants is going to be better than our existing control? And you should have a specific target metric, maybe sometimes two, but ideally just one success metric that you're focused on, with a specific lift that you're expecting to achieve from that success metric. I think the mistake I see some companies make when they're just getting started with A/B testing is they list out 10 different metrics that they're going to run, and they say, well, if any of these metrics improve, then we're going to call it a win. The problem with that is most companies are using a 5% p-value for statistical significance, which still means there's a 5% chance that it could just be random error that caused you to see a positive lift. So what that means is, if you're testing 20 different metrics, then just statistically, one of those 20 will see a positive lift just based on error, based on random chance. And so what you want is to be very targeted in the metric that you're focused on moving with an A/B test, with a qualitative hypothesis for why you think that metric will move. And then you can have secondary metrics, which include health metrics or guardrail metrics that you're watching to make sure that those don't decline. So for example, let's say you're on the ads team and you were launching a new ad format. This is relevant to Duolingo and chess.com, right? Because they're freemium products, and in between lessons on Duolingo or in between games on chess.com, you get shown an ad. Maybe right now it's a banner ad on chess.com, but they decide they want to run a full 15-second video ad. Well, that's almost certainly going to increase ad revenue, but it could negatively impact free user retention rates, because now you're showing free users who get exposed to ads much more intrusive ad content. So that's a good example of a guardrail metric that you want to look at to make sure that, all right, even if you increase average revenue per user, or you increase ad revenue, if the impact on free user retention is too high, then you're still not going to roll the test out. And the one other thing I'll add is, for really important tests that significantly impact your core user experience, this can be a good opportunity for a pre-mortem, which is basically where you sit down with the team and you map out, like, what's the worst case scenario of things that could go wrong here, or what are some corner cases that we might overlook. So for example, let's say that, here's a famous example from Duolingo. Let's say that we're going to run out a bunch of new push notifications. Well, anytime you add a push notification, the short-term impact is almost always positive. But the net effect of adding too many push notifications over time can be, you tank retention, because people get annoyed and frustrated and they leave. And so in that case, if you were to sit down and do a pre-mortem, you might say, well, we expect that in the first month, rolling out all these new push notifications is going to increase X variables, but we need to run a holdout group for 3 months to make sure that the long-term impact doesn't lead to a significant decline in retention. So pre-mortems can be really effective for those trickier A/B tests, just to make sure that you don't miss anything, especially with the longer tail.
Yeah, actually, like the making decision based on like statistical significance and p-value is a bit tricky, and p-value can go down for 1 day, 2 days, and then go up again. And I saw a lot of cases like this. What are your like rules, approach, where to stop experiment, where to like make decision to roll out it or not?
Oh boy. Well, in theory, we are typically looking for 98% stat sig, because at least in the monetization world, we want to be absolutely sure that, or as close as we can, that the change that we're making is overall positive. That said, we break that rule a lot. And it's part of it is what we've seen historically, but also part of it is just our gut, and kind of where we see how we approach monetization. And so trying to think of a good example, but essentially it's we have directionally we have like direction metrics. So like we know directionally subscription paid rates are looking better, for variant A or B. And we typically will not roll out an experiment if it looks like that, but there are often times where we're never hitting significance. Like we'll run an experiment for like 2 months, which I would not necessarily advise, but we've done that and we never hit stat sig. Directionally, it looks good for one of our test variants, but we never hit stat sig. And so then we're left with like, well, what do we do? And that's a really tricky and frustrating place to be. But it also says that, maybe what you're doing by like control is doing just fine, and maybe you need to rethink what the actual experiment is. So therefore, we usually won't implement that, but we'll try and iterate on one of those variants to see if we can make a large enough change and run that experiment again. So 98% stat sig is normally what we go for, but there's a lot of posts that we make. We have like a specific experiment announcement channel where the whole idea was like, when I created that channel, I wanted people to be very vocal about what their experiments were doing, regardless if they have definitive evidence that control or test works. Like, even if you're not sure, put it in there. Like directionally, we're up, 3%, but we're still going to wait a little bit longer. It's really important to be open and transparent about where your experiments are, and not just wait for your stat sig result, because you may never get it.
Yeah, it's true.
I have a couple quick thoughts on that. So one, it's awesome that you guys run 98% statistical significance. I feel like most run 95, but it's an example of where having such a large user base, 200 million plus registered users on chess.com, I think over 100 million active users, that's a massive advantage, right? Because you can actually afford to run tests. You can afford to run thousands of tests a year, which is what Albert is pushing for, and still reach statistical significance with a 0.02 p-value.
We try to.
Exactly. But I mean, and it goes back to my point around the compounding advantage of A/B testing, right? Because A/B tests lead to positive impact, lead to larger user bases and more revenue, which leads to the ability to run better A/B tests with larger sample sizes and more statistical rigor. So there's a virtuous loop there, which is great. Yeah, and then I think the thought that you shared, Joe, around like, well, p-values can change and they ebb and flow over the course of the experiment. This goes back to why ideally you use your sample size calculator and your runtime calculator to figure out in advance how long you need to run the experiment, and you don't look at the data in between. Because what can be tempting is you go and you look and it's day 2 and you're like, oh my gosh, the variant is winning by 20%, but there can be a novelty effect for certain tests. It's like you roll out something new, people get really excited about it. So in the first 2 or 3 days, you see this huge lift, but then more often than not, it falls back to earth. And if it falls back to earth too much, then you might end up with a p-value that isn't statistically significant, or even a negative effect in the long run. And that's why it's important not to call an experiment too early.
Yeah. We were testing. This was our paywall page. We had like these 3 cards. It was our different tiers: gold, platinum, diamond. And we just wanted to test reordering those, because I think at the time we had diamond on the far right, and we wanted to see, well, what would it look like if diamond's on the left or in the middle? So we tested changing those, and we saw some pretty quick positive results for that. And we thought it was very exciting. And then we wanted to keep running it. And as we kept running it, that excitement just started dwindling and dwindling. And then we just pretty much just came flat. Some of them, I think Diamond on far left ended up negative. And it took us a couple weeks, if not maybe like a month and a half, to reach some type of statistical significance. And yeah, that early excitement was unfortunate, but it happens.
Yeah, it happens. It's quite all about A/B testing. Yeah. All right. What do you think like the best method to calculate like significance stands for non-binary metrics like ARPU, revenue, LTV? Because it's like many marketers and product managers who are running monetization A/B tests, they like have a primary metric as ARPU or revenue. And we have a lot of questions about how to calculate this properly. What's your approach for that?
Have a finance team that does it for you. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't touch that side. And we use Amplitude, and they have a StatSig calculator that is a part of the tool, and so that's what we use. I will say, as of this year, we now have like a dedicated senior data analyst on the monetization team. I think all of our core work streams now have their own analyst, and that's been really helpful because they are able to look at data a little differently. But yeah, I'm Phil. You may have more info on this, but when it comes to understanding LTV and when it becomes StatSig, that's not one of my strengths. That's for sure.
Yeah, no worries.
I can do a spreadsheet, but
this goes a little above my head too. I would say, in terms of like the very specific statistical techniques you need to use during an A/B test to measure significance for non-binary variables like ARPU, that's really more of a data science or analytics question. In terms of taking the results of an A/B test, like, okay, we saw an X% lift in subscriber conversion, or a Y% lift in subscriber retention, or a Z% lift in average subscriber ARPU or LTV, and then building those into your financial model, that I have a lot more experience with. And at Quizlet, what we did was, so I ran a team of 5 PMs across user growth and subscriptions. Each PM had a tab where they kept track of all their A/B tests, sort of the theme of the A/B test, the name of the A/B test, a link to the underlying PRD or A/B test description, the target metric, the expected impact, the actual impact, the delta between predicted and actual impact. And so the reason a tool like that was so important was it allowed me to see across all 5 of the PMs on my team how many experiments we were running. So A/B test velocity, what our hit rate was, meaning the percentage of wins over the total number of tests, the average impact per win. And then to directly answer your question, if this was a subscriptions team experiment and the target variable was average revenue per user, then we can take that percentage lift. And then to Joe's point, we work with the finance team. Ishmael was our VP of finance. So I go to Ishmael and I say, hey, can I work with an analyst on your team to plug in this X% lift in ARPU? And does it apply to all subscribers? Or is this lift only applying to student subscribers or teacher subscribers? Or is it only on mobile or web? Like, all these questions are very important. But once you really clearly defined what percentage ARPU lift you've got and which users that applies to, then you can bake it into your financial model and basically like map out what impact that should have through the end of the financial year. And then that's what ultimately goes to the board in the board meetings and goes to your investors so that they have comfort that you're going to hit your plan.
Yeah, we have a sheet that I'll use occasionally when, like I was talking about our friends and family plan, or when we're making sizable changes to our paywall, where I'm able to quickly input like what our SKU distribution is for that experiment, and we have baked in LTV metrics for each of our plans, both monthly and yearly, and that can give me like a total lifetime value and like a total sign up number. And it's, now that we have that template set up, it's much easier for us to understand, roughly speaking, the overall impact for the next year of implementing an experiment or not.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, actually, I've heard recently a good advice how to calculate that. You can just export data set to ChatGPT and just ask to calculate the significance of the LX metric, which is good. And this is like related to my next question about AI and how the AI shapes the experimentation process for the companies. If you already apply some AI tools or AI approach, or just think how AI could shape it in the future, what do you think? What could it be?
Yeah, so chess as a game and as a online platform, they've been using forms of AI for years, and that's mainly because of the chess engines. So we're not new to that, but what we are new to, I think, is using all these new prototyping tools, and using ChatGPT to help us build out what are like an acceptable deliverables, or kind of what you mentioned, is this stat sig data. So I'd say at least for me on the monetization team, I am using AI tools to make sure that I'm not missing anything, because it's nice to have a helper that you don't feel self-conscious saying what does this mean, or what have I missed in this document. For our friends and family plan, I used ChatGPT to help me build out QA cases, what are we not covered, and I could inject the actual QA plan in my write-up, and it's what are we missing, and it found some really interesting use cases. I would say from building out experiments, we're still pretty new on the AI front. We are testing a new prototyping tool to just help us quickly mock up designs. That way we can send those to the devs quickly and try and, again, 1,000 experiments a year. We gotta figure out how to speed that process up. So that's definitely one way that we're trying to. But I'm not sure if we're doing much else. We're still very early. We have a couple Slack channels set up where different people are talking through AI use cases, and this is what AI did for me today. I know there are other teams who are using AI more proactively, but not so much from the monetization side, at least not yet. I don't know, Phil, if you have anything to add here.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing, and I alluded to it before, is just teams that are far smarter than I'll ever be are figuring out ways to use AI to both speed up A/B testing, meaning you can run the same A/B test in some cases in a shorter period of time because you're using more advanced analytical techniques to get to a statistically significant result faster. Or two, to take some of the manual work of building new product variants out of the team's hands. So I mentioned this company Helium, and full disclosure, I'm an investor in Helium, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think very highly of these guys. It's a former Uber and Meta team, and one of the co-founders is a data science guy for his whole career, right? And so they've just developed ways to automate A/B testing of paywalls specifically as a starting point, because paywalls, there's not all that much that you change in a paywall, right? There's the copy, if there's a visual or creative aspect to it, there's an image, there's the pricing, there's things like strike-through pricing and which badges you use to emphasize certain plans like annual versus monthly, but there's a set of maybe a dozen variables that you change on a paywall. And so they've figured out ways to use AI to not just run the A/B test in a more efficient way to get to statistical significance, i.e. using techniques like multi-arm bandit, but also to be able to using generative AI to create different variants of the paywall, so that the team doesn't have to be as involved. So that's literally they're coming up with new variants and running it while the team is sleeping at night, and there's some real advantage to that.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, and yeah, if you mentioned that these are tools what's it called, Helium? Yeah,
Helium.
Yeah. Let's check out, guys, if you haven't heard about that. Yeah, and what's the top recommendation would be from your side for people who just starting A/B testing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of mentioned this earlier. I can kick this one off. I would say just rip the Band-Aid, just get started. I've seen teams hem and haw for months and years about are we doing it the right way? Are we going to get it wrong? And you probably are going to get some things wrong. We're one of our clients right now is just getting started. We started working with them last October when they hadn't even launched a product yet. Now they've got thousands and thousands of users, but they're still small. They're still figuring out how to A/B test. And so, there are bumps and bruises along the way, but that's the only way to learn and to get better. And so I think some of it is you just got to jump in and do it. And then I guess my other recommendation would be, as with so many other SaaS products, like don't try to build your own A/B testing solution out of the gate. Just go hire a team that spends all their time living and breathing A/B testing, because there are plenty of good tools out there. A few of them. So there's Eppo, there's VWO, there's Growthbook, there's Optimizely. There are a bunch of, for paywall specifically, you've got RevenueCat, you've got Helium that I mentioned before. There's Superwall. Like there's some tools out there you can use to take a lot of the
Adapty as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Adapty. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so we had been using different tools that we're now building an internal testing. Well, not now. For the last 5 years, we've been building an internal tool, and that should give you an idea of, it's much easier to just go straight, key turn solution with someone else versus building something internally. And that's like, we have a huge dedicated team to that, and it's, there's some great things that come with it, but it also takes a long time, and there's a lot of trust that team has to gain from everyone else to feel good about the data that we're seeing. But from starting from scratch, I think it is really like trying to keep it relatively simple, like understanding, like ultimately what is your hypothesis, and trying to keep the scope of what you're testing very small, at least at the start. Like I mentioned, we were testing CTAs, like just the ordering of things, like trying to, at the end of the day, when you know that variant 1 or test 1 was the winning one, why did it actually win? Is it because you changed a color and you changed a grid? Like if you were testing 6 different things at once, you're not going to know much. And so try and test things simply, get an answer, move on to the next one, and like build off of those. It's all just iterations.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right. I think that's it. We don't have any questions in the chat, fortunately. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. And thank you very much, guys. It was like a really good conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I hope it was useful, helpful for our audience. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
It was great to be here. Thanks for doing it with us, Joe, and thanks for having me back, Andre.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.